there comes a moment, quiet, unsettling, and impossible to ignore, when you begin to notice the pattern, not all at once, not in some dramatic revelation, but in fragments, in the way their tone softens only when they need something, in the sudden warmth that appears just before a request, in the silence that follows once you have given everything you had to offer, and slowly, almost painfully, you begin to understand what you thought was love was never truly love at all. It was conditional, measured, calculated. You were not embraced for who you are, but for what you could do. Your kindness became a resource, your loyalty became an expectation, your presence became convenient, and the more you gave, the more it was assumed you would always give. There was no celebration of your existence, only appreciation for your usefulness. You were valued, but not in the way a soul deserves to be valued. You were valued like a tool, admired only when you served a purpose. At first, you didn't question it. Why would you? It felt good to be needed. It felt meaningful to be the one people turned to. You convinced yourself that this was connection, that this was belonging. But there is a quiet danger in confusing being needed with being loved, because one feeds the ego while the other nourishes the soul. And over time, you begin to feel the difference. You start to notice how your worth fluctuates in their eyes. When you are useful, you are important. When you are tired, unavailable, or simply human, you are forgotten. The shift is subtle but sharp. The attention fades, the care disappears, and you are left standing in the echo of a connection that only existed when you had something to give. This is the illusion. The carefully constructed belief that you mattered unconditionally, when in reality your value was tied to your output. It is a painful realization because it forces you to confront something deeper. You were not seen. Not truly, not completely, only partially, only in ways that benefited them. And perhaps the most difficult part is not what they did, but what you allowed yourself to believe. You overlooked the signs, you silenced your instincts, you accepted less than you deserved because you thought that was all there was. You kept showing up, kept proving your worth, hoping that one day it would be enough to be loved without conditions. But love does not require proof. It does not demand performance. It does not disappear the moment you stop giving. Real love remains, even when you have nothing to offer but your presence. And anything less than that is not love. It is dependency disguised as affection. So now you stand at a crossroads, no longer blind to the truth, no longer comforted by illusions. And the question becomes unavoidable. Will you continue to offer yourself where you are only valued for your usefulness? Or will you finally choose to be seen for who you are, beyond what you can provide? Because once you see the illusion, you can never unsee it. And once you understand your worth, you can never again settle for being treated like something that is only valuable when it is used. The slow death of self-worth. It does not happen suddenly. There is no single moment where everything collapses and you recognize what is being taken from you. Instead, it happens quietly, so quietly that you barely notice it at first. A small compromise here, a silent tolerance there. You begin to adjust yourself, reshape your boundaries, soften your voice, all in the hope of maintaining what you believe is connection. And without realizing it, you start to disappear. When your worth is tied to what you provide, you begin to measure yourself differently. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "What can I offer?" Your value becomes transactional, even in your own eyes. You feel good when you are useful, when you are needed, when you are giving. But the moment you have nothing left to give, when you are tired, overwhelmed, or simply human, you begin to feel like you are failing. This is how self-worth erodes, not through loud rejection, but through quiet conditioning. You are taught again and again that your place in people's lives depends on your performance. So you perform, you overextend, you sacrifice your time, your energy, your peace. You become the one who fixes, who supports, who shows up no matter what. And in doing so, you slowly abandon yourself. There is a particular kind of loneliness in this. You are surrounded by people yet unseen, appreciated yet not understood, needed yet not truly valued. Because deep down, you know that if you stopped giving, if you stepped back even slightly, Everything would change. The calls would become less frequent. The messages would lose their urgency. The warmth would fade. And that realization creates a quiet fear inside you that without your usefulness, you are nothing. So you keep going. You push yourself beyond your limits, convincing yourself that this is strength, that this is loyalty, that this is love. But it is not strength to constantly drain yourself. It is not loyalty to betray your own needs. And it is not love to feel like you must earn your place in someone's life. Over time, the damage becomes harder to ignore. You feel exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. You begin to question your own value, not because you lack it, but because it has been defined by others for too long. You forget what it feels like to be appreciated for simply existing, without conditions, without expectations. And perhaps the most dangerous part is how normal it starts to feel. You become so accustomed to this pattern that you no longer question it. You accept it as reality. You convince yourself that this is how relationships work, that everyone must prove their worth, that everyone must earn their place. But that belief is a quiet lie that keeps you trapped, because your worth was never meant to be negotiated. It was never meant to rise and fall based on how much you give or how much you do. Your worth exists independently of your usefulness. It is not something you have to prove. It is something you must remember. The slow death of self-worth begins when you forget that, and it ends the moment you decide that you will no longer measure yourself by what you provide, but by who you are, whole, complete and deserving, even in your stillness. The moment of awakening. There is a moment, sharp, undeniable, when the fog begins to lift. Not because everything suddenly changes, but because you do. It often arrives quietly, disguised as a thought you can no longer suppress, or a feeling that refuses to be ignored. Something within you begins to question what you once accepted without hesitation, and in that questioning, a door opens, one that cannot be closed again. You start to see patterns where you once saw coincidence. The repeated disappointments, the one-sided efforts, the way your presence is only acknowledged when it is needed. What you once excused as misunderstanding now feels intentional. What you once called patience now feels like self-neglect. And the truth, uncomfortable, heavy but liberating, begins to take shape. It is not that they suddenly became different. It is that you finally see them clearly. This awakening is not loud or dramatic. It does not come with applause or validation. In fact, it often comes with silence, a deep internal stillness where everything you believed begins to unravel. You revisit memories with new eyes. Conversations that once felt normal now carry a different weight. You begin to notice what was missing, not just what was present, and the realization settles in. You were giving more than you were receiving and calling it love. There is a certain pain in this clarity, because awakening does not just reveal others, it reveals you. It shows you how much you tolerated, how often you ignored your instincts, how many times you chose to stay quiet when something felt wrong, not out of weakness, but out of hope. Hope that things would change. Hope that if you just gave a little more, tried a little harder, it would finally be enough. But awakening strips away that hope, not to leave you empty, but to leave you honest. You begin to understand that what you were chasing was not real connection, but validation. You were trying to secure your place in someone's life by proving your worth over and over again. And in doing so, you lost sight of a simple truth. You should never have to convince someone to value you. This moment changes everything, even if nothing around you immediately shifts. Because once you see the imbalance, you cannot pretend it isn't there. Once you feel the weight of what you have been carrying alone, you can no longer call it shared. And once you recognize that your effort has been met with convenience rather than care, something inside you begins to withdraw. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of awareness. You stop over-explaining, you stop over-giving, you stop chasing responses that should come naturally, and in that quiet shift, you begin to reclaim something you didn't realize you had lost, yourself. Awakening is not the end of the story, it is the beginning of a different one. A story where you no longer ignore your own voice, where you trust what you feel instead of dismissing it, where you choose clarity over comfort, even when it hurts. Because the truth is, ignorance may feel peaceful, but it is fragile. Awareness, on the other hand, is unshakable. It may come with discomfort, but it also brings freedom. Freedom from illusions, from false attachments, from the need to prove your worth to those who never truly saw it. There is a strength that does not announce itself, does not demand attention, does not seek approval. It moves quietly, almost invisibly. But when it arrives, everything changes. This strength is detachment, not the cold absence of feeling, not indifference born from bitterness, but a deliberate decision to no longer tie your peace to the behavior of others. For so long, you were emotionally invested in outcomes you could not control. You cared deeply, gave endlessly, and waited for consistency, for reciprocity, for acknowledgement that rarely came in the way you deserved. You held on, believing that persistence would eventually be rewarded, that your effort would be recognized. But instead, you found yourself drained, repeating the same cycle, hoping for a different result. Detachment begins the moment you understand a simple truth. Not everything deserves your energy. It is not about shutting down your emotions. It is about redirecting them. It is about choosing where your attention flows, where your effort goes, and where your heart is allowed to rest. Because when you give your energy without boundaries, you slowly lose control over your own state of mind. You become reactive, dependent on external responses to feel stable. And that is not power, that is vulnerability disguised as loyalty. True power is being able to step back without needing closure from those who never intended to give it. It is the ability to remain calm when others expect a reaction. It is choosing silence when explanations would only fall on deaf ears. There is a quiet confidence in no longer needing to prove your point, no longer needing to be understood by those who have already decided not to see you clearly. Detachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop over-caring in places where your care is not respected. It means you stop chasing people who only turn toward you when it benefits them. It means you release the need to fix, to rescue, to constantly be the one who holds everything together. At first, this shift feels uncomfortable. You may question yourself. You may feel guilt for pulling back, for no longer responding the way you used to. But that discomfort is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are breaking a pattern, one that kept you giving more than you received. As you begin to detach, something unexpected happens. Your mind becomes clearer, the noise fades, the constant need to analyze, to overthink, to anticipate, it all begins to quiet down. You are no longer consumed by what others think, say, or do. You return to yourself, to your own sense of stability, to a place where your worth is no longer dependent on external validation. And in that space, you become untouchable. Not because nothing affects you, but because you have chosen not to let everything control you. You no longer react to every shift in behavior, every inconsistency, every absence. You observe, you understand, and when necessary, you walk away, not in anger, but in clarity. Detachment is not loss, it is liberation. It is the realization that your peace is too valuable to be placed in unstable hands, that your energy is not infinite, and where you invest it matters deeply, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply let go. There comes a stage in your life where everything you once tolerated becomes unacceptable, not because the world has changed, but because you have. The version of you that once chased approval, that once bent under pressure to be accepted, no longer exists in the same way. In its place stands someone quieter, steadier, someone who has learned through experience that peace is far more valuable than validation. Becoming untouchable is not about building walls so high that no one can reach you. It is about building a foundation so strong that no one can shake you. There is a difference. One is rooted in fear, the other in understanding. And what you begin to develop is not distance from people, but distance from dysfunction. You no longer react the way you used to. Situations that once disturbed your entire day now pass through you without leaving a mark. Words that once made you question yourself no longer carry the same weight. You have learned to pause, to observe, to recognize what deserves your attention and what does not. And in that pause, you reclaim control. This version of you does not seek to be liked by everyone. That need has quietly dissolved. You understand now that being accepted by the wrong people often comes at the cost of losing yourself, and you are no longer willing to pay that price. So you become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of respect for your own energy. You begin to move differently. You speak less, but with more intention. You give, but without expectation. You care, but without attachment to outcomes. There is a calmness in your presence that was not there before, a sense that you are no longer trying to prove anything to anyone. Because you finally understand that your worth is not something that needs to be demonstrated, it simply is. People may not immediately understand this change. Some may interpret your silence as distance, your calmness as indifference. But what they fail to see is the discipline it took to become this way. The nights of overthinking you had to overcome, the emotional patterns you had to break, the hard decisions to step away from what was familiar but unhealthy. Becoming untouchable means you no longer allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent actions. You are not easily pulled into conflict, not easily manipulated by inconsistency, not easily shaken by the opinions of those who never truly understood you. You have learned to stand firm in who you are, even when it means standing alone. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all is this: you no longer need to be needed. You no longer measure your importance by how often someone reaches out, how much someone relies on you, or how deeply someone depends on your presence. You have detached from that cycle completely. Your sense of self is no longer tied to external validation. It comes from within, steady, grounded, unshaken. This is what makes you untouchable. Not perfection, not superiority, but self-possession. A quiet certainty that you will no longer abandon yourself to maintain a connection, that you will no longer shrink, overextend, or lose your peace just to be accepted. And in this state, something remarkable happens. You do not chase respect, you attract it. You do not demand space, you naturally create it. You do not force connections, you allow the right ones to meet you where you stand. Because once you become untouchable, you are no longer available for anything that requires you to lose yourself.